a tribal god, right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
And so Israel's enemies... Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
Yes.
The Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. I'm told sometimes that this is actually an exercise in hyperbole. God didn't mean everyone. It continues, do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. And if you think that this is hyperbole, consider what happens when Saul does conduct the destruction of the Amalekites as ordered, and decides to leave alive the king as well as some of the best of the livestock. He leaves them alive. For this small act of mercy, God responds by saying to the prophet Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king because he's turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. So not even the animals can escape this genocide. So I'd like to ask Dinesh, I suppose, directly, which is it? Is this a morally corrupt series of events, or do I have to dispel with my moral intuition that genocide, including of innocent children, is a bad thing?
Let's talk about the moral sense, since you raised it, and we'll just talk about it briefly.
I want to make sure we've got time for Q&A, but look, I can reread the text if you like. The Amalekites...
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites, in part because, here's the problem. For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the New and is seen through the light of the New. So if you want to go to, Dennis Prager, who has written about this from a Jewish perspective, has written about the Deuteronomy, the Book of Kings, the Amalekites.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he considers
later,
to be the justifiable massacre of the Canaanites. I don't really want to go there because...
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Well, the reason I don't want to go there, the Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
Yes, and
that is hold on.
Massacres which are ordained.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
Sure.
Agreed. And
why are you saying Yahweh instead of God? Why are you trying to distance yourself from the God of the Old Testament?
Well, I'm not trying to distance myself. I'm simply trying to say that any reader...
So why is that the first time you've used the word Yahweh in this conversation?
I'll tell you why. Because there is a movement within the Bible itself that you are completely missing.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and law.
Referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Old Testament law. And what I'm referring to here is an Old Testament law, which you're now trying to distance yourself from and say that it's sort of different.
I'm saying that
that's not what Jesus thought.
I'm saying you're missing the developmental track of the Bible that is obvious to any intelligent reader. Let me give you one example of what I'm talking about.
Tell me about the Amalekites. Tell me what the development.
It's not about the Amalekites. It's about the way that the whole story of the Bible changes in tone and mood and message.
But for example, help me out here. Just tell me where, any way you like. Tell me where this fits into that trajectory.
Okay, I'll tell you where.
We have just a couple minutes, guys, so let's wrap it up before the Q&A.
Just tell me. The underlying message of the Old Testament is an eye for an eye. The Amalekites are the enemies of the Israelites. The Israelites will crush them with the same venom that the Amalekites would have crushed the Israelites. That's called an eye for an eye.
Including
now,
hold on. The children, the infants, the cattle, the sheep, the camels, the donkeys.
Yeah, Dennis Prager says yes, but my point is different. You will not find that spirit at all in the New Testament. In fact, in the New Testament, you've got a spirit of forgiveness. So what I'm getting at is to pretend like you don't have this. Christianity is named after Christ. It's based on Christ as a fulfillment of the Old Testament. But what does fulfillment mean? It actually means transcendence. In Abraham's time, blood sacrifices are normal, right? When Christ comes as a sacrifice, Christ is the lamb. The point is, those blood sacrifices aren't necessary anymore.
Listen,
That's the Christian reading. And you keep filibustering me because you know that the Bible is showing a movement in a direction, and to miss the movement is to miss the Bible. Let's look at God in the Bible.
Hold on.
Let me make one quick point about God in the Bible.
There's nothing quick about what you're doing, Dinesh. There's nothing quick about what you're doing. I need to be allowed to respond to what you're saying. I'm getting sick whenever
you're cross-examining me on the justice of smiting the Amalekites. Honestly, I don't see any justice in it, but I do agree that was the eye for an eye ethic of the Old Testament that is repudiated and transformed and transfigured in the New.
I've had this conversation so many times, most recently with William Lane Craig. At least he had the gall to just tell me that yes, that was a moral thing for God to do. I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it. This is not an eye for an eye. This is a genocide of combatant men, innocent women and children and animals. Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals.
That is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening. What taught you is the 1,000-year tradition of the early Christian church.
Which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
It came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
Were the Israelite armies not instructed by the God that you believe in?
They were instructed by God.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
So God has commanded them to do something which you now consider to be immoral. Whether or not you consider it to be immoral because of the later developments of Christian ethics, God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition that the slaughter of women and children, and by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them,
I don't view it that way. This is how I view it.